Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Maloney, and I'll be presenting today on Fingerprint Comparison Software. Now, as a disclaimer, I am the director and co-founder of a company called Forensic Comparison Software, and we sell software of this kind. But what I'm going to say and what I'm going to demonstrate can be equally applicable to other software of this kind. So, let's get started. Now, I've broken the presentation up into three parts. I'm going to define the problem that software purports to solve, and then I'm going to go into the background of the software. It's my background and the software's background, which is pretty much one and the same. And then I'm going to demonstrate the software, which is probably going to be the most useful part of the presentation. So let's move on to the problem. Now, I've defined the problem as how to fully introduce digital images into the fingerprint comparison workflows. This was a problem that I had to solve in my time as the supervisor of other caseworkers, first in the Northern Territory Police and then later in the Australian Federal Police, was to fully integrate the digital technology of that time into our workflows. And I came to the conclusion pretty early in the piece that there was one key piece in the technology puzzle that was missing, and that was fingerprint comparison software. And we had the cameras, we had the capture devices, and we had the means to display the images on screen, but we didn't have that last piece. And so the problem I found was that I had to get a full suite of technology, and that last piece was not available anywhere in private or in any other government agency. So we had to solve that problem. Now, a little bit about my background. I've had 20 years experience in fingerprint casework and the supervision of other fingerprint caseworkers across 3 agencies. The first of those agencies was the Northern Territory Police. I gained a lot of experience in that agency because of the small section that it was, and in a high crime area. There was no choice but to use everyone available in that section for all types of work, including minor and major crime, and in fingerprint casework. And I gained my expertise in 1994, and I was in court many dozens of times giving evidence as a new fingerprint expert. And then I went on to the Australian Federal Police in 2005 and became the officer in charge there in 2006. Then I later became the officer in charge of the Australian Immigration Agency, and I started the first fingerprint section in that agency. Now, in the 1990s, starting off as a trainee, we used the Henry class, 35mm film, latent lips, and everything was paper. Cases were paper, fingerprint forms were paper. We printed off photographs which were paper, and it worked fine. It was what it was, and it was the digital technology that was introduced later that made that a lot more efficient, of course. During my time in the Northern Territory, I introduced digital cameras, so we're very rudimentary back then. We used I think it was the first one we used was a Sony 1000, which had a CD writer capability. And the reason we used it is because the CD thing could be used as a permanent record of our images, and it could be included in the case file. There was some doubt back then about what status CDs and digital images had. It's been worked out since, but back then there was some question marks over it. And I introduced some flatbed scanners. We were the first agency in Australia to introduce live scan, and we went on to basically introduce quite a few of the technologies required to convert to a digital environment. Then I moved to the Australian Federal Police, and I introduced the high definition dual monitors. And it was then that I introduced a very early version of fingerprint comparison software. Now, up until that point, there wasn't anything really available. There was Photoshop, which you could, jury rig in a way to get two images up on the screen, but it was very clunky, hard to use, and you had to have a fair bit of experience and knowledge about Photoshop, which was in short supply back then. And then I later created a company to further develop the fingerprint comparison software in 2010. And the reason I could do that was when I was with the Australian Immigration Department, I was actually a contractor. So there wasn't any legal impediments for me doing that. So it worked out quite well for that reason. Now, the pieces of the digital image puzzle that had to be in place for this all to work, for the vision of a fully digital environment, as far as a fully digital workflow for fingerprint comparison, all of these things had to be in place. Now, the digital cameras, well, they were introduced quite a long time ago, but it took a while for the resolution to be at the right level and to be inexpensive enough to buy, and also for the macro lenses to be commonly used. They weren't at all common in the early days of this technology, and it took a while for that to happen. The other thing that sort of slowed things down was there was not entirely known at the time what sort of legal status these digital images had. Were they an exhibit? If you copied one, what is that copy the original, or is it another copy of the original? How did that all work? And it took a long time for the courts to sort that out and to accept them as they do now, completely accepted. The other thing was scanners. The scanners, to begin with, were very low resolution, and the flatbed scanners got better over time. I mean, you could get away with 500 DPI, but a lot of these scanners were not up to scratch to begin with. Personal computers, obviously, personal computers changed everything in the 90s and 2000s. In the work environment, they're far more common at home. When I was in the Northern Territory in the 90s, it was far more common for people to have computers at home than in the workplace. And it took a long time for everyone to get their own PC. I remember we had one shared PC in the 90s in the fingerprint section, and it was used for a few things, word processing and things like that. But most things were done on paper. HD monitors, in the beginning, the resolution of the monitors was not great. And it was probably better to use your magnifying glass if you really needed to look closely into a fingerprint in the early days compared to the monitors. The cheap storage is another thing that's underestimated in adopting this technology, the overall technology that is using digital images in fingerprint comparison software. If we didn't have that cheap storage as we do now, this would not be possible. The images take up a lot of space. And in the beginning, there was a real shortage of space in our collective drives in the agencies that I was in. So it was a big problem, and that it became cheaper and easier to store images over time. Not to be underestimated. The other thing is digital networks. There was a lot of talk about the networks not being, the pipes not being big enough to take that much data. And it was a real problem as well. When sharing information with our national AFIS, when I was in the NT and then later in the Australian Federal Police, we had to use federal pipes, federal networks to get those large images from where they were taken, where the live scans are taken, or where the flatbed scanners were scanning the fingerprints to our national AFIS in Canberra. So networks were another thing that had to be upgraded, and the size of the pipes had to be much, much bigger. And coming on to AFIS, AFIS made a big difference to our ability to use digital images. All the digital images that we had on AFIS in our national AFIS system in Canberra, they were there, but getting access to them so that we could use them in a comparison sense, like putting two images side by side. One has to be the known set of 10 prints, and we could download those 10 prints from our national APHIS, either in NIS format or in JPEG format, which made a big difference. We had high quality images that we could use to compare our latent fingerprints to. And now we come to finger comparison software. Now, there wasn't anything around until about 2006 when we came up with, I think it was the world's first, but there's probably something out there that was around before then, but I haven't heard of it. There was a very rudimentary piece of software that the Australian Federal Police had developed, but it was almost unusable. Nobody liked it, and it wasn't good enough to be used in any kind of real sense in our workflows. Now, I'm just going to go briefly over what are the advantages of digital images over traditional methods. I mean, some of these are probably pretty obvious to us now, but it might be easier to go through those one by one so that we can spell them out. First of all, overall, digital images are quick and easy compared to the traditional methods of using paper. They're easy to capture. Digital cameras, you had to really watch how many shots you took with a 35mm film. Usually they came in 24 or 36 images. So you had that many in a roll. I mean, you could change rolls, but that was inconvenient and you really didn't want to do that. So you wanted to keep it to one roll per job at the very most. And sometimes you'd use one roll for 2 or 3 jobs. Enhancement, there was very limited enhancement you could do with a 35mm film. There were techniques, but they were very advanced and not many people knew how to use them. Transmission, again, you'd have to send physical copies of photographs through the mail or to deliver them by hand, where you can use digital images to send across the world. There's no comparison as far as that is concerned. And then there is the comparison of 2 images side by side. There were some mechanical devices called comparators in the early days, put out by Searchy, I think. And we had one, and it was useful sometimes, but you had to get an advanced version of it to be able to print out what you've actually just marked up on those 2 images. And they were 2 images side by side. You could put in on one side of the device, it was a mechanical device, put on one side of the device, you could put in the photograph of the latent, and on the right side you could put a set of 10 prints that you could move around and get the right image. And then you could use a pen or something to mark up the features. And then on those advanced versions of it, you could print it out. We didn't have that version. So it was of limited use to us back then. And now we come to really the reason why the software was developed to begin with. The original reason that we came up with the software was for the health reasons. Basically, my health issues at the time. So we'll go into that. Now, they say a picture paints 1,000 words, and this really sums up the issues we had with the pieces of paper that we were using on our desks and using magnifying glasses to conduct fingerprint comparisons. Now, this gentleman was a team member that worked for me in the Australian Federal Police, and it was in the early 2000s. And you can see a couple of monitors in the background. This is just before we introduced the forensic fingerprint comparison software. So it's a good indication. This is a major case. Obviously, there's lots of latents and photographs and 10 prints on his desk, and he's going through each one, and it's, to be quite frank, a bit of a mess. So the things that strike you straight away is this leaning over the desk. Anybody can see that now looking back, having used fingerprint comparisons, for how unhealthy this is for you to be leaning over a desk like this with your head, which is quite heavy, almost horizontal to the desk. The strain that puts on your neck and back is quite severe. So it's also the eye strain of looking through a lens, which is not, it's distorted around the edges, let's face it, on a magnifying glass. And it's the strain on your eyes constantly looking through that. My right eye was particularly badly affected. That was the eye I used with magnifying glasses, and it was quite bad. It used to be my good eye, now it's my bad eye. So obviously some long-term damage has been done to my eyes looking through magnifying glasses. The neck and back strain, the headaches. At one time I was, as the officer in charge, one of my tasks was to do the technical reviews on all the cases. I didn't have to do all of them, but I was in a position where most of my team were away, deployed, doing cases overseas, and there wasn't anybody else to do these technical reviews, so I was doing most of them. And of course, morning to night doing these reviews on these cases with a magnifying glass hunched over my desk, I came home with headaches most evenings. And the fatigue, I mean, you really were so tired by the end of the day that you really just went home and lay down. It was that bad. And not everyone had to do that. Ideally, you could break up the day with some casework, some crime scene work, or some laboratory work or something like that. But if you had to do this all day, it really takes a toll, and it did on me. So I was looking around for something to solve my problem, because either that or I had to get out of fingerprints, and I didn't really want to get out of fingerprints. I'd invested quite a few years in it, and I wanted to stay there, but that was an option at that time. Now, when I introduced the fingerprint comparison software, at that time it was called Workmate. It was an early version that was free. We just gave to anybody who wanted it, and it made an enormous difference to the workflows and to the general well-being of your staff. It was better health outcomes, less sick leave, productivity increased, and we did that because the software that we used to replace the paper comparison workflows was as easy or easier than using the magnifying glass. It had to be for people to accept it. Now, my goal was to get everyone to accept it, even those who'd been there for 30 years and swore by magnifying glasses. My goal was for them to accept it straight up, because they could see immediately the health benefits. And they did, luckily, and it became accepted almost overnight. I was very pleased with that. I was very worried to begin with to say some of the more established examiners may not take to this kind of technology, but in the end it was fine. The newer members, no problem. They were already primed because they were starting to get used to the digital world, and they were primed to use this software. So it was a much easier sell for the younger members of the team. Now, the advantages, we'll just go through the basic advantages. I estimate that once we introduced the comparison software, our output doubled. It wasn't just that it was as efficient or more efficient than the magnifying glass. People wanted to use it, and they worked for longer without breaks, which is probably, it's probably not good to go too long without breaks, even on a computer. But say, the breaks though on the using the magnifying glass were longer and more often because they needed to. There was more definition that you can get out of a HD monitor using this software than you can a magnifying glass. So we got harder identifications were possible, harder in the sense that you could clearly see features that were harder to see using the magnifying glass. We could transfer images across country. At that time, my section, the Australian Federal Police fingerprint section, was decentralised. We had 4 offices around Australia in the major capital cities as well as Canberra. Now, I was supervising these guys at a distance, which is very difficult unless you've got a digital kind of workflow, and this made it so much easier. With image enhancement, it's so much easier with the software. We included a few of the basic enhancement techniques, like the contrast and the black and white spectrum. Most of the things you do with these images is using those 2 tools. There's some other tools we include too, but they're nowhere near as popular as those 2. And with the software, it was possible to write notes as you went, as you conducted the comparison, and you can mark up with numbers on the image and write notes of what features they were and what what clarity they were, and any other types of notes that might be relevant to that particular feature. You can even include notes about the actual crime scene where you found the fingerprint image, or the latent image, like the point of entry and things like that. And we also included in the later versions of the software a automatic charting tool. I don't know if you remember using the old charting methods of you getting two photographs and sticking it on a piece of cardboard, and then using little red strips to mark out the each feature with the numbers and things like that. Very, very hard, very, very long-winded version of charting. And this version on the software is very much quicker. Right. Now we're just getting down to the comparison tool itself and some of the basic features that each fingerprint comparison software should include. And I'll just go through them one by one. Obviously, they've got to have space for displaying two images side by side, the unknown and the known. That's basic. And you've got to be able to position those images on the screen. You've got to be able to rotate them, and you've got to be able to load any kind of format image. And I'll demonstrate that in a minute with the actual software. You've got to have advanced image enhancement. And I just discussed that briefly just before about some enhancement techniques. It's not only the black and white contrast and the saturation where you can take all the color out, especially for nin-heightened prints and things like that, very useful. And things like flipping the image. If you consider there might be some kind of transfer issue, you can flip the image, and you can revert black and white. So there is a invert tool that you can change all black to white and white to black, so that if you've got a fingerprint on a 10 print which is black on white, you might want to convert the actual latent fingerprint which has grey or white powder to a black color, so you're comparing like to like. Those sort of things, very basic things, but very important to have those things at least in the fingerprint comparison software. Markup and notes, I think I discussed that briefly just before about you've got to have space to be able to write the notes up under the ACE plus V methodology. You've got to have those kind of things in place so that you can explain your conclusions later, either to a reviewer or to the courts. And I've discussed also automatic fingerprint charting, very important, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. Now this comes down to the demonstration of the software, and I'm just going to pause there for a second, and we'll move on to that in shortly. Now, as you can see, I've loaded the application on the left side, and you can see that it's a split screen, naturally. You've got the unknown on the left and the known on the right. And to load the image, you left-click onto the image. I've got some images in a folder down here on the right, bottom right. Left-click onto that image using the mouse and hold and dragging it across into the screen and letting go. And I use the mouse, left-click on the mouse to move it around on the screen to the location I need it in. And I can use the right-click on the mouse and hold to rotate it. And the scroll on the mouse to zoom. Now, if you're doing this all day, every day, those three things you use a lot, like all the time. And you can change the image in the screen to the next image in the folder by just left-clicking and dragging it in there, replacing with the new one. Or you can use this feature up the top here called Next and Back. If you hit Next, it goes to the next image in the folder. So you can quickly go and assess which image or which fingerprint is the one you need to start with and start examining. Okay, I'll just bring it back to the original and zoom in. I can load a set of 10 prints on the right side. Okay, and I can zoom in on the finger that I want to look at. When you're first looking at a set of 10 prints, you quickly just go across each image in turn by dragging it across with the left click and going along until you see an image that is worth looking at a bit closer. Now, I just happen to know that this is the the right index. So I'll just zoom in on that and I can start my comparison. But first I want to do is demonstrate the different kinds of formats that you can load. On the right here in that folder is this one here that's on there now is a JPEG. So I'll just load a bitmap image, but it'll also take raw, TIFF, and any other major format that you can think of. It can also load NIS files. So I'll just grab this NIS file into the screen. Images down the bottom here start to appear. And to bring up those images, just left click it and it'll appear on the screen here. For those who don't know, in case you don't know, a NIS file is the format used by AFISs to share information and share fingerprint files. So in the case of the Australian AFIS, we have access to these NIS files, and they're in their original format, which is an FBI image format, and it's either at 500 DPI normally, or can be up to 1000 DPI. In this case, the images are very clear. You can zoom in and demonstrate that. So I'm just going to load my original set of prints here and just get rid of that screen on the side there. Or they can also load PDFs. So I'll just demonstrate that now and load the PDF. PDFs are a bit slower because they're not a image format exactly. And so it takes time to unravel the text part of the file from the images. And you can see down the bottom here that there are two images connected to this PDF. I'll click onto one of them and it'll appear on the top right hand side here, and you can zoom in on the PDF. Okay, so I'll just bring back the original set of 10 prints. Close that screen and zoom in on the image you want to start to examine. Now, I probably should have explained it before, but there are some tabs at the top of the application on the top of the screen here. And the first one is the Images tab, which we're currently on, and it has mostly enhancement tools and a few other things to do with changing the image to the next image. And we have the Edit tab that deals mostly with the marking up of the image. The Reporting tab, which is to do with the charting. And we have an AFIS tab here, but I won't be going into the AFIS tab very much, except to say that it's there as an option. Going back to the Image tab, we'll go ahead and demonstrate the brightness and contrast. What you do here is you left click on the mouse on that little red dot and turn it around on the dial to go up and down, same with the contrast. And the saturation, which you really need a color print to demonstrate, and sharpen, which just sharpens up all the edges so that it's easy to look at. Actually gives it a bit of a 3D quality, the sharpen tool. Okay, I'll just load some colored photographs. I've got some here. I'll just go and load an Indonesian print and just to zoom in on it. Now, I showed you the brightness and contrast, but saturation is an important tool too if you want to remove some of the color. And there's an invert tool here, which you can invert the images from white on black to black on white. Sometimes easier if you're looking at like ridge detail. And I'll just remove a little bit of that color. There you go. And I can use sharpen to make it sharper on the edges. Yeah. Okay, and one more feature in the enhancement toolbox is the flip feature, and it flips it vertically, so that if you suspect that there is an image transfer from, say, a plastic container to another surface, you can use that flip to see if that is what's happened. Okay, now that basically explains. If you want to take it back to the original setting, there is a reset button. Takes it back to the original settings on the color, on the enhancements. And there's one here called layout, which takes you back to the original position of the print, to its original size. Very handy sometimes. Okay, I think we might, well, I might just demonstrate the in-height print. That's usually a pretty good one to demonstrate as well with the saturation. I think you're probably all very familiar with some of these tools. They are very common. And 90% of the time, this is really all you need. maybe even 95%. I'm just going to maximize the screens here and demonstrate the Edit tab. Now, the Edit tab is where you mark up the features. And normally you would not have any images in the right screen if you want to follow the strict rules of comparison, but we won't worry about it for the demonstration purposes. Now, to mark it up, all you need to do is hold down the space button and left click onto the feature. Now, that's not very big. I'm just going to make these features a little larger. So, oops, get rid of that. And that's a bit better. I mean, you wouldn't mark the features normally, but for the demonstration purpose and for the video, I'll mark them a little bit bigger than I normally would. I'll just get rid of that one there. Okay, so there's a few ways you can mark up the features, but generally all you do is press the space button and then click onto the feature. I'll just mark up a few of these features here. And I'll mark that one down there, and that one there, and that one there. That'll do for now. Okay, now you go across to the set of 10 prints. Just going to minimize my screen a little bit, and I'll mark up those features as well. And there, I'm just going to zoom in on the left screen to demonstrate just what can be done with the features. And I'll just highlight one of these features. And I've just shown you before how you can change the colors from different colors on there on the gyro, or if you want to use some other color that's not on the gyro system. But we're going to stick with the gyro system for now, and we can change the size as I've already demonstrated. But for the notes purposes, you can also put in clarity and the type. So I'm going to give this high clarity. If you don't want to use the gyro system will automatically set the clarity as high if you want to use that system. And you can put in the types on the notes that you're doing. So if you want to have a complete notes on the comparison, you can do this level of note taking. Now, I've got here label 3. At the moment, because I'm using numerical labels, it's in the order that I've actually marked the features, but you can change that. And I'll show you later how you can do that. And you can write some notes on that. You can put in there anything that you like as far as the particular feature. It might be a particular unusual shape or something like that. And that in there, and it'll show up in the notes as well. And these two down here are the line size, and that's to do with the charts. If you want the lines on the chart later to be blue, you use this color here, but you can use any color. And the lines could be of a certain size as well, and that I'll demonstrate how that can be changed on the chart. Right, so now we've got that done. I'll just show you another feature here called Draw. Now, on a PC, it's a little bit difficult to draw with a mouse. And I'll just make the pen size a little bit bigger. There's a pen dial here, so you can see it. So you can draw on the screen itself, and you can use the eraser to take it out. I would recommend, if you were going to draw on an image, that you'd use a touch screen with a pen. It makes for a far better result. Right, and then we have the ruler. Now, if you want to, the ruler can be used in two ways. It can be used for the APHIS function, but if you don't use the function, you can use it in a different way, and that is to scale both images exactly the same. So you take two features that are on this image here, you hit the ruler, and you drag a line between those two features. And you do the same on the other image. Let's close that a little bit. And I will take it from there to here. Match zoom. Then you hit match zoom, and both of these images are now the same zoom. And you can freeze the image so that it doesn't move, so you can go lock. And whatever you do now, the images will be the same zoom. If you zoom in and out, they'll zoom in and out And if you rotate them, they'll rotate together. Okay, so I'll just take that lock off. All right, now I'm in the edit screen. So if I want to select a whole bunch of images at once, I can select here, I can go and drag across here. All the images are now being selected, and I might just select them to change them to green, or I might select them as all being of a particular type, or if I want them all of high quality, I can do it that way as well. And I can do that on both screens, obviously. So I can select those three. They're all high quality. So I can select all green. Actually, one of those could be a yellow. So I'll make them all high quality, and I'll select this one here as of medium quality. There we go. So everything can be done really quickly by selecting all of the features at once. And now, obviously, there's several different ways of deleting it. You can undo, you can delete them, and there's a right-click function which gives you a shortcut to some of the things I've just shown you. Shapes, quality, types, shapes, and delete as well. Okay, that was a really quick overview, but you get the idea. And before I go on to the charting, I think what I've just shown you, I think, is an absolute minimum for any comparison software. And everything else is nice, but those are the bare minimum. Now, the reporting tab gives you the function of being able to create a chart. Now, what I'll do is I'll make these images more or less as the same as, might make it a bit smaller. Okay, all right. Now, I can still use the match zoom because that's still in force. All right, let's make this a little bit smaller. Okay, now I'm ready to create a chart. All we have to do is to auto chart. Hit auto chart, and all these lines will show up on the outside of the images. And for the most part, they're pretty close. So, but I can move around so that they're exactly the same. I can use that one and put it across here. And that's still pretty good. I might just move that across a little bit so they look a little bit the same. Okay, they're pretty good. Now I can change things so that the numbers are all the same going around in a clockwise direction. So if I hit auto number, all those numbers now changed. And if I hit auto letters, you can use letters instead. But you can change the font size as well, so they're a bit bigger, so they get easier to see. And you can change the margin size too, so it's smaller or larger. There's a lot of flexibility in making the chart. Now I'm going to change my image across the screen here and show you the notes page. Now if you hit notes, it comes up on the right-hand side here, or report, I should say. I'll put it in report. I'll just make this a little bit bigger so you can see it a bit easier. All those notes I made before are now in here, whether it's a ridge ending, whether the clarity is high. I haven't actually allocated some of these, but you can go back later and do that. And it also gives you all the details of all the changes you've made to the images. If you've made them lighter or darker, etc. And it's all made in here. And there's a report on the location of the image files. And a nice thing here too that you can include in those notes is a copy of the chart. Now I'm just going to make that smaller, and I'm just going to copy that and go back to the reports page, and then I'm going to include that in the report, so it's up the top there. What you can do now is then copy that. Okay, I can save it to a Word document. It saves to a Word document automatically. You don't have to grab a Word document. It just does it automatically. So I'm just going to save that to, and then save it. And then I'll go back and I'll show you how it looks when I open it up. So you've got the chart at the top, and you've got all the details of your report at the bottom. You can sort of space out a bit better so it's a bit neater. So comparison at the top, and all the report notes at the bottom. You can also add notes in here about the location of the fingerprint at the crime scene, things like that. There's no real limit to how much you can add to that as far as the notes. Yep. So there you go. That is pretty much it in a nutshell. That is the comparison software. Now, the last thing I want to show you is the APHIS tab. I'm going to load a latent. I'm just going to show you what a latent search would look like. Now I'm going to show you the APHIS tab and see what it does. It's a tool that can be added to the comparison software if it's needed or wanted. I'm just going to include, I'm going to show you some latents. I'm going to drag across one of those latents to the left screen. I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit, give it a bit of correct orientation. And then I'm going to hit search. At the top left-hand corner here is a search. I can also search 360. I'll hit search and I'll just shift my screen there. And you can see that it's come up with all the candidates. And a couple up here are high scores. This is why the big tick is there. And I'll double click that and it can be loaded to the right screen for you to do a comparison. Now, the other thing you can do is you can do a 360 search. I'm going to turn that upside down so orientation is an issue. I'm going to recommence the search. So first of all, I'm going to search it using the other method, and there are no hits. All these scores are too low. So I'm now going to hit the 360 search. It takes a little long because it's doing several searches around in the circle. So it's hit again, and it's hit against the record. So it's that quick. This particular version has a maximum of 500 records that you can search against, but we have APHISs that go up to 100,000 records. Okay, now that concludes the presentation. I think I should mention that I didn't mention before, this software is actually developed by my son, who was used to work for Microsoft at eBay as a developer, and he's kindly written this software for me, and he is the one I'm in business with this company. Okay, if there's any questions, just send me an email or send me a text, and I'll be quite happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.